It was supposed to be a perfect autumn morning. The leaves had begun to turn shades of crimson and gold, and the crisp air carried the scent of pumpkin spice and wood smoke. I was on my way to my grandson Ethan's 6th birthday party, humming along to an old hymn playing on the radio. A vanilla-frosted birthday cake sat securely in a box on the back seat, and I smiled, thinking about how blessed I was to celebrate another milestone with my family. I had checked the rear-view mirror to make sure the cake hadn't shifted when it happened. I never saw the truck coming. The impact was sudden, a force that shattered the peaceful morning in an instant. Tires screeched, metal crunched, my world spun out of control. And then, silence. Not the kind of silence that follows a loud noise, but a silence so deep and vast it felt like sound had never existed. Later, the doctors would tell my family that I was clinically dead for 16 minutes and 42 seconds. But in the place where I went, time didn't move the way it does here. What felt like only moments on Earth stretched into something much greater, something beyond human comprehension. And what I saw in that time would change the way I understood life, death, and the world beyond. The last thing I remembered before everything shifted was the sensation of my car skidding across the asphalt. Then suddenly I was somewhere else. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't even in pain. In fact, I felt lighter than I ever had before, as if the burdens of my earthly body had been left behind. Around me stretched an endless expanse of light, not just any light, but a radiance so alive, so full of warmth and love, that it seemed to pulse with energy. Yet, despite its brilliance, it wasn't blinding. It enveloped me, not like light from a lamp, but like being immersed in liquid love, if such a thing could exist. This was no dream, no hallucination. It was real. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my 69 years of life. Then, I sensed it. A presence beside me. I turned, though not in the way we turn in our earthly bodies, and saw a being unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't made of flesh and bone, but of pure light, as if it were woven from the very fabric of the place I now stood. And yet there was no mistaking its presence. It was alive, conscious, and deeply aware of me. Then, without speaking, it called my name. Pamela, the being of light communicated, not with words, but with something deeper, more direct. The message entered my soul as if it had always been there, waiting to be understood. You have questions. A sudden realization gripped me. This being, this presence, knew everything about me. Not just the person I had been on Earth, but the deepest questions I had carried in my heart. The unspoken thoughts I had never put into words. And then, just as suddenly as I had arrived in this place, the journey began. What followed was beyond anything I could have imagined. What I learned in those minutes changed everything I thought I knew about angels, the spiritual world, and why some of us can see beyond the veil, while others cannot. I stood there, or rather I existed there, in a place unlike anything I had ever known. The air, if it could be called that, shimmered with a presence that wasn't just seen but felt, as though love itself had taken on form. I had never known such peace, such clarity of thought. Every fear, every worry I had ever carried seemed to melt away in the presence of the being before me. It radiated light, but not like sunlight or a lamp. This light had weight, substance, and intention. It was alive, aware, and filled with a love so profound that I felt it wrapping around me like the embrace of a long-lost friend. I somehow knew that this being had always known me. Every thought I had ever had, every prayer I had ever whispered, and every doubt I had ever carried. You have questions, the being communicated again, not with words, but through a deep knowing that resonated inside me. Questions? I hadn't even realized I had any, but the moment it spoke, a flood of curiosity rose in me. I thought of all the stories I had heard growing up, of people seeing angels in their final moments, of near-death experiences where some witnessed heaven while others saw nothing. Why did some people experience the supernatural while others never did? The being must have understood my thoughts because, without hesitation, it gestured, though not with hands but with pure intention, and suddenly, we were moving. I wasn't walking, nor was I flying, yet I was being carried effortlessly through what felt like layers of existence. Realms unfolded before me, each revealing something new, something deeper. Then, in an instant, we stopped, and I found myself standing before something so vast that it took my breath away. It was a tapestry of light. At first it seemed infinite, stretching far beyond what I could comprehend. But as I focused, I realized that it wasn't just light. It was made up of countless individual points of energy, each one pulsing with life. "These are souls," the being conveyed. "Every person, every life, every spirit that has ever existed." I gazed in awe. Each point of light was unique, vibrating at its own frequency, some shining brilliantly while others glowed faintly. It was like an enormous celestial symphony, each soul playing its own note in a song that had no beginning and no end. I watched as some of the lights grew brighter when they encountered something unseen, while others remained unchanged. "Why do some shine while others don't?" I asked, not with my voice, but in the way one speaks in this realm, with pure thought and understanding. "Because spiritual awareness is not random," the being responded. "It is connected to readiness and timing. Each soul awakens in its own way, at its own pace, according to what it is prepared to receive." As I took in the sight before me, the being gestured again, and suddenly, scenes of human life unfolded all around us. It was as if I were watching multiple moments in time, playing out simultaneously. I saw a young mother standing in her kitchen, her hands clasped in prayer, her face lined with worry as she begged God to heal her sick child. Though she could not see them, angels surrounded her, their light pulsing gently as they ministered to her and her child. Then another scene. An elderly man lay in a hospital bed, his breathing shallow, his time on earth coming to an end. Unlike the mother, his eyes were wide with wonder as he gazed at the radiant being standing beside him, waiting to escort him home. The contrast struck me. Why could he see them while she could not? The answer came in waves of understanding. "Perception is not a gift given at random," the being explained. "It is shaped by free will, by faith, and by the journey each soul must take. God never forces spiritual awareness upon anyone. Instead, he allows it to unfold naturally, according to what is best for each person." Then I was shown something else, something that moved me to my core. I saw moments of deep spiritual silence, times when people cried out in prayer but heard no response. I saw a man pleading with God for a sign, his heart heavy with doubt, his soul desperate for reassurance. But there was no answer, at least not in the way he expected. "Why?" I asked. "Why does God sometimes feel silent?" The being turned to me, its presence radiating deep understanding. "Because silence is sometimes a form of mercy," it conveyed. "If a soul were to experience the full reality of the spiritual world before it was ready, it could be overwhelmed. God, in his wisdom, reveals only what each soul can bear." In that moment, I understood. I saw how every soul is like a flower in a vast and endless garden, each one blooming at its own pace, some opening early, some much later, but all under the careful tending of the divine gardener. "But what about angels?" I asked. "Are they always with us, even when we cannot see them?" The being gestured again, and I watched as countless unseen hands reached into the physical world, guiding, protecting, comforting. I saw people going about their daily lives, unaware of the celestial beings standing beside them. I saw near-miss accidents where an unseen force pulled someone back from danger. I saw lonely souls who thought they were abandoned but were surrounded by angels who never left their side. And then, in an instant, I remembered Job. The being spoke again, and its words filled my heart with clarity. Just as Job was unaware of the spiritual battles being fought over his life, so too are many today. But whether they see or not, they are never alone. Tears welled up within me, though I wasn't crying in any physical sense, because at that moment I knew with absolute certainty, we are never alone. The vast tapestry of light continued to stretch before me, a breathtaking mosaic of souls, each glowing with its own unique radiance. Some shined brilliantly, pulsing like the stars in a clear night sky, while others remained dim, their glow faint but steady. The being of light beside me stood in perfect stillness, yet I felt the depth of its presence surrounding me, as though it was both beside me and within me, filling my soul with understanding. "Watch carefully," the being conveyed, and in an instant, we moved again. Not through space as I had known it, but through something deeper, something more real than physical movement. Suddenly, I was no longer observing the tapestry from a distance. Instead, I was within it, experiencing it from the inside. Around me, I saw what looked like windows into different lives, moments playing out in real time. These weren't just random glimpses of the past or future. They were revelations about the nature of spiritual sight and how it is shaped by the choices, beliefs, and hearts of those who walk the earth. I turned, or at least I became aware of a new scene unfolding before me. A young mother, her hands trembling, knelt beside a hospital bed where her child lay still, fever burning through his small body. She clasped her hands in prayer, her lips moving silently as she pleaded for healing, for mercy, for a sign that she was not alone in her suffering. She saw nothing. She heard nothing. And yet surrounding her were countless angels, their presence so strong that the very air shimmered with light. They were touching her, whispering to her heart, strengthening her. But she was unaware of them, lost in the silence that she mistook for abandonment. I turned again, and a different scene appeared. An elderly man lying in bed, his breathing shallow, his time on earth slipping away. Unlike the young mother, his eyes were open wide, filled with wonder and awe. He saw them. The same angels who had surrounded the woman now stood beside him, their light reflecting in his tired eyes. A peaceful smile crossed his lips as he reached out, his frail hand stretching towards something unseen by those around him. I didn't need to ask the being why the experiences were different. The understanding had already settled into my heart, like a long-forgotten truth being remembered. Some see because their souls are ready. Others do not because their time has not yet come. The words, though not spoken, echoed through me with undeniable clarity. I watched as more lives unfolded before me, each one revealing another layer of spiritual sight. Some people went their entire lives without ever perceiving the supernatural, and yet they were no less loved, no less guided, no less significant in the divine plan. I saw people who had begged for a sign but had received none, only to later realize that their faith had been strengthened in the silence. I saw others who had been given powerful visions, not as rewards, but as responsibilities, to share, to teach, to remind the world that there is more beyond what the eye can see. Then, the being guided me forward, and I found myself standing in what looked like an endless garden, blooming with flowers of every shape and color. Some were in full bloom, their petals wide open, basking in the light. Others were still tightly closed, their time to blossom not yet upon them. "This is how spiritual sight works," the being conveyed. "Every soul blooms in its own time, according to the wisdom of the one who tends the garden." I gazed at the flowers, understanding with perfect clarity. No flower was better than another. No soul was greater than another. Each was on its own journey, unfolding exactly as it was meant to. A deep sense of peace settled over me as I absorbed this truth. The pressure, the doubt, the questioning of why some people experience spiritual encounters while others do not. It all dissolved in that moment. It was never about being more special, more worthy, or more faithful. It was simply about timing. I turned to the being, filled with gratitude, and the scene shifted once more. This time, I saw something that brought tears to my eyes, though I wasn't crying in any physical sense. I saw people going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the divine presence surrounding them. I saw angels walking beside them in grocery stores, standing guard at their bedsides, whispering words of encouragement into their ears. I saw moments where people almost stepped into danger, only to be pulled back by a sudden thought, a strange feeling, or an unexplainable hesitation. I saw that nothing was truly random. I saw that when we feel a sudden urge to pray for someone, it is because the spiritual realm is already moving on their behalf. I saw that when we feel comforted in times of deep sorrow, it is because we are never ever alone. And then, I saw something even greater. I saw how prayers, even the smallest, most desperate, most broken prayers, created ripples in the spiritual realm. Each prayer was like a drop of water in a vast ocean, spreading outward, touching lives in ways that the one who prayed could never imagine. I saw prayers that had been whispered in empty rooms, in hospital beds, in moments of despair, prayers that had never been forgotten, never been ignored. Every prayer is heard, the being conveyed. Every cry for help is answered. But sometimes, the answers come in ways beyond human understanding. I looked back at the tapestry of light, and for the first time I truly saw it. Every glowing point, every flickering soul, was connected by invisible threads, weaving a divine story that no one could fully grasp from the earthly side of existence. Some souls had been given the ability to see beyond the veil, to witness glimpses of the unseen world. Others had been asked to walk by faith alone, trusting without sight. Neither path was better. Both were sacred. I turned to the being of light, and though it did not speak, I understood the message it left within me. You have been shown this, Pamela, not for yourself alone, but so that you may share it, so that others may know they are not forgotten, so that they may understand that whether they see or not, they are never alone. The light around me pulsed, warm and embracing. And then, without warning, I felt the first pull back toward my body. The journey was not over yet. The pull back toward my body was subtle at first, like the gentle tug of an unseen thread. But the being of light was not finished showing me the truths I had been brought here to witness. The tapestry of souls still stretched before me, glowing with the energy of life itself, and as I gazed upon it I saw something new, a reality hidden from most of us on Earth. It started as a faint distortion in the light, a ripple across the delicate threads that connected one soul to another. Then, as if adjusting my vision, I became aware of a battle unfolding in the unseen realm. It wasn't the kind of battle we imagine with weapons and warriors, but something far greater, more profound. I saw shadows moving at the edges of the tapestry, pressing against the glowing strands of light, trying to weave their own threads into the fabric of existence. These shadows weren't random or chaotic. They were intentional, deliberate, seeking to cloud the perception of those on Earth, to plant seeds of doubt, fear, and despair. And then, I saw the angels. They moved with a swiftness and grace beyond anything I could describe. Beings of radiant light, powerful yet gentle, strong yet full of love. They did not fight with violence, but with purpose, with truth, with faith, with divine authority. They shielded the souls who were vulnerable, whispering words of encouragement. filling hearts with sudden moments of peace, standing guard over those who could not yet see. I was shown how this battle was not new. It had been raging since the beginning of time, playing out across generations, shaping the lives of millions in ways they never realized. Just as Job was unaware of the spiritual battles fought on his behalf, the being of light conveyed, so too are many today. But whether they see or not, the battle continues. I saw people on earth, going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the forces moving around them. A man sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his mind clouded with thoughts of hopelessness. He had convinced himself that no one cared, that his life had no meaning, but he did not see the angel beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder, speaking truth into his spirit. "Hold on just a little longer. You are not alone." Then, I saw a woman sitting in a dimly lit kitchen, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, fear gripping her heart. She felt trapped, abandoned, convinced that her prayers had gone unanswered. But above her, an angelic presence stood watch, filling the space with unseen light. She could not see it, but she suddenly felt the urge to pray. Not a long or eloquent prayer, just a whisper, a simple, desperate plea. "God, help me." And that whisper sent ripples through the spiritual realm. The being beside me turned to me, and without words, I understood something with absolute clarity. Every prayer, no matter how small, has an effect. Every cry for help is heard, even when the answers don't come the way we expect. Even when it seems like nothing is happening, the battle is being fought on our behalf. Then, the vision shifted again. I saw a different kind of struggle, not between angels and shadows, but within the hearts of people themselves. I saw a woman, her eyes full of anger, gripping onto resentment like a shield. She had been hurt deeply, betrayed by someone she trusted, and though she wanted to move on, she could not let go of the bitterness. And yet, standing beside her, an angel patiently waited, holding out a key made of light. It wasn't a key to a door, but to her own heart. The angel could not force her to take it, but the moment she whispered the words, "I forgive you," even before she fully meant them, the key unlocked something within her, and the darkness that had weighed her down began to lift. The being of light beside me spoke again. Spiritual sight is not just about seeing angels. It is about seeing truth, and sometimes truth can only be seen when the heart is ready to receive it. I felt those words settle into my soul like a seed planted in fertile ground. Then I was shown something that brought me even greater understanding. I saw children, young, innocent, full of wonder, and completely open to the spiritual world. I watched as a little boy giggled and reached out toward an empty space in his bedroom, as if playing with an unseen friend. A baby stared up at the ceiling, smiling at something no one else could see. The being beside me conveyed a simple but powerful truth. Children are not taught to see. They are taught to stop seeing. As we grow older, we become distracted, skeptical, weighed down by the physical world. The noise of modern life creates a kind of spiritual static, drowning out the whispers of the divine. But the good news, the incredible, beautiful truth, is that we can remember. We can clear the static. We can tune our hearts back to the frequency of heaven, just as a radio is tuned to the right station. How? Through faith, through prayer, through love, through small, simple choices to trust, even when we cannot see. I felt the pull toward my body growing stronger now, like an unseen force gently guiding me back. But before I left, the being of light shared one final truth. Whether you see angels or not, whether you feel their presence or not, they are always there. Every person is part of this battle. Every soul is loved, and every life, no matter how ordinary it may seem, is infinitely precious in the eyes of the one who created it. The light around me pulsed, and suddenly I was falling, not in fear, but in surrender. And then, the sound of beeping monitors, the feeling of solid ground beneath me, the voices of doctors and nurses. I was back, and nothing would ever be the same again. The beeping of hospital monitors faded in and out like a distant melody. I could feel the weight of my body again, the heaviness of existence pressing down on me. My eyelids fluttered, adjusting to the sterile brightness of the room. Voices murmured nearby, blending into the rhythmic hum of machines keeping time with my heartbeat. I was back, but I wasn't the same. I lay there, feeling both overwhelmingly present and yet still tethered to something beyond. The memory of where I had just been, the radiant light, the presence of the being, the tapestry of souls, the unseen battle was still so fresh, so vivid. It was more real than the hospital bed beneath me, more tangible than the cool air against my skin. A doctor hovered above me, his face lined with astonishment. "You're awake," he said, as if he hadn't expected me to be. In the corner of the room, my daughter Rachel sat in a chair, her face streaked with tears. The moment our eyes met, she let out a sob and rushed to my side, gripping my hand as if she feared I might slip away again. "Mom," she whispered, "we thought we lost you." I swallowed, my throat dry and raw. But there was something I needed to say, something pressing, urgent. "I saw them," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. Rachel blinked, confusion flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Saw who?" I took a slow, shaky breath, gathering the words that felt too big for my human tongue. "Angels," I said, my voice steadier now. "I saw them, Rachel. And they—" I paused, emotion tightening my throat. "They're real. They're always with us." Rachel looked at me, her expression a mixture of concern and something else, something deeper, as if part of her already knew the truth of what I was saying. The doctor cleared his throat, glancing at his clipboard. "Mrs. Anderson, you were clinically dead for 16 minutes and 42 seconds. Frankly, we don't have a medical explanation for how you came back. Most patients in your condition—" He hesitated. "Well, they don't wake up." I understood what he wasn't saying. People don't just return after that long. Not without brain damage, not without consequences. But I had returned with something far greater than just a beating heart. I had returned with a message. The days that followed were surreal. My body healed far quicker than the doctors expected, though I still felt a deep exhaustion. Not just physical, but something deeper, as if part of my soul was still adjusting to being back in this world. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of what I had experienced, the luminous tapestry of souls, the battle in the unseen realm, the angel standing beside the woman in prayer, whispering comfort that she could not hear. And most of all, I remembered the truth I had been given. Whether you see them or not, they are always there. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. The being had told me to share what I had seen, not to convince, not to prove, but to offer hope. But how could I put something so immense, so beyond human language, into words? I started small, with Rachel. We sat together on my porch one evening, the sky painted in hues of amber and rose. The scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air, and the rhythmic chirping of crickets provided a steady background to our conversation. I told her everything. I told her about the moment of impact, about the sudden silence and the radiant light. I told her about the being of light who knew my soul as if it had always been known. I told her about the tapestry of souls, each one glowing, each one at different stages of awareness. I told her about the unseen battle, about how the darkness tries to weave into our lives, whispering lies of despair and loneliness. And I told her how angels work tirelessly, unseen but never absent, guiding, protecting, ministering. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable, But when I finished, she looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always wondered," she said softly, "why some people seem to have those kinds of experiences and others don't." I nodded, understanding the depth of her question. "Some see because their souls are ready," I said, repeating the words the being had placed in my heart. "Others walk by faith alone. Neither path is better, they're just different ways of being led home." Rachel was quiet for a long time. Then finally she spoke. "When I was a little girl," she said, "I used to see shadows in my room. Not scary ones, just figures. I told myself it was my imagination. But sometimes, I wonder if maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe I was seeing something real, and I just forgot how—" I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "We all forget," I said. "The world makes us forget. But that doesn't mean it stops being real." That conversation was the first of many. As I recovered, I began to share my experience with others. Not in a way that demanded belief, but in a way that invited hope. I told my friend Carol, who had lost her husband and often sat alone in her grief, wondering if he was truly at peace. I told my grandson Ethan, in a way his young heart could understand, that even though we can't always see them, angels watch over us just like God does. And I told strangers, people I met in the grocery store, a woman who struck up a conversation with me in a waiting room, her eyes filled with the quiet weight of burdens she didn't speak aloud. Again and again I saw the same reaction, the longing, the wondering, the unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they had feared. And the truth is, they weren't. None of us are. Whether we see angels or not, whether we feel their presence or not, they are always there, working, protecting, guiding, whispering reminders of God's love when we need them most. I was given this message not for myself, but for others, to remind them of what I now knew with absolute certainty. We are never alone. And that truth? That changes everything. It had been weeks since I left the hospital, but in many ways I still felt as though I existed between two worlds. The earthly one, where time moved forward in a predictable rhythm, and the other, the place of radiant light, infinite love, and eternal truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had returned for a reason. The being of light had told me to share what I had seen, but as I moved through my days, I realized something. Not everyone is ready to hear it. Some people, like my daughter Rachel, listened with quiet reverence, their hearts already open to the possibility of the unseen. Others, like my neighbor Tom, chuckled nervously when I mentioned angels, quickly changing the subject as if my words unsettled something deep within him. And then there were those, like my grandson Ethan, who accepted it without question. "Grammy," he asked one afternoon while playing with his toy dinosaurs on the living room rug, "do angels play games?" I smiled. "I don't know for sure, sweetheart, but I think they must. After all, I saw that they love us. And what better way to love a child than to play with them?" He grinned at my answer, satisfied. I envied the purity of his faith. One crisp autumn afternoon, I went for a walk in the park near my home, the golden leaves crunching beneath my feet. The air smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of apples carried by the breeze. As I strolled past the playground, I noticed a woman sitting on a nearby bench. She looked weary, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than a lack of sleep. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought, her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup gone cold. Something stirred in my spirit. I had seen this before, in the hospital, in my conversations with strangers, and most vividly, in the vision I had been shown. This woman was not alone, even if she felt she was. I hesitated. But then the words of the being of light echoed in my heart. "Share what you have seen." So I sat beside her. We didn't speak at first. We simply watched the children running and laughing, their energy filling the air with life. Finally, she sighed. I used to believe in all that, she said, her voice quiet. Angels, miracles, God listening to our prayers. I turned toward her, giving her my full attention. What changed? I asked. She let out a small, sad laugh. Life, she said simply. Loss, prayers that never got answered. I understood. More than she knew, I understood. I took a breath and said, I was in a car accident a few months ago. I was clinically dead for 16 minutes. Her eyes flickered with something, curiosity, disbelief, maybe even hope. And? She asked. I told her. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. I told her about the tapestry of souls, the unseen battle, the angels who work tirelessly even when we cannot see them. I told her how some people experience divine encounters, while others are asked to walk by faith alone. And most of all, I told her what had changed my understanding forever. Not a single prayer goes unheard. Not one. Even when we don't feel it. Even when the answer is different than what we expected, there is always a response. She was silent for a long time. Then finally she whispered, I prayed for my mother when she was sick. Begged God to heal her, but she still died. What kind of answer is that? Her words held no anger, only a deep sorrow. I reached for her hand. I don't have all the answers, I admitted. But what I do know is that we don't always see the whole picture. I saw prayers. They move like ripples in the spiritual realm, touching places and people we can't even comprehend. Your prayer for your mother might not have healed her the way you wanted, but I promise you, it wasn't ignored. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't respond right away, but she didn't pull her hand away either. She just held on, as if the words had opened something within her, something she hadn't even realized was closed. I didn't push her for more. Some truths have to settle in the heart before they can be spoken aloud. After a long pause, she let out a shaky breath. I think I needed to hear that. I squeezed her hand. I think that's why I was meant to sit here today. She nodded, staring at the sky. Maybe God hasn't forgotten me after all. I smiled. He never has. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about all the people I had spoken to since returning from my experience. Some listened with open hearts. Some resisted, unwilling or unable to believe. But I realized something important. My job wasn't to convince anyone. My job was simply to plant seeds, to remind people they are seen, they are known, they are loved. And whether or not they believed me, whether or not they could see what I had seen, it didn't change the truth. Angels were still working. Prayers were still being answered. God was still moving. I closed my eyes, breathing in the crisp night air, feeling the warmth of an unseen presence beside me. And for the first time since I had returned, I felt something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Peace. The days turned into weeks, and life carried on, though I knew I would never see the world the same way again. Once you've seen behind the veil, you can't unsee it. I found myself watching people differently. Not just their faces, but their spirits, their unspoken burdens. I could sense, even if I couldn't always explain how, when someone needed to hear a word of encouragement, when someone felt unseen, when someone's faith was hanging by a thread. And in those moments, I knew I had a choice. Stay silent or share what I had been given. It was a chilly afternoon when I found myself in line at the grocery store. The store was busy, filled with the rustling of shopping bags and the hum of conversation. I had only a few items in my cart, but the woman in front of me had a full load, her cart overflowing with canned goods, baby formula, and household essentials. Her shoulders were tense, her hands gripping the cart handle as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Something about her felt heavy. Not just physically, but spiritually, as though she was carrying a weight far greater than the bags she would soon take home. As she reached for her purse, I noticed her fingers trembling. The cashier rang up the last item, and then the total flashed on the screen. The woman let out a quiet sigh, barely noticeable, except that I was listening. She pulled out a few bills, then hesitated, her eyes darting between the groceries and her wallet, mentally calculating what she could put back. I didn't think. I just acted. "Let me cover the rest," I said softly. She looked up, startled. "Oh, no, It's okay," I said with a gentle smile. "Consider it a little reminder that you're not alone." Her eyes welled with tears. She didn't argue again. She just nodded, her lips pressing together as she tried to hold back the emotions threatening to spill over. As the cashier handed her the receipt, she whispered, "Thank you. I—" Her voice caught. "I was just praying on the way here, asking God to help me get through this month." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "He heard you." She blinked at me, something shifting in her expression, something like recognition, not of me, but of the unseen presence she had been searching for. Later that night, I sat on my back porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the stars blink into existence. I had always loved the night sky, but now it felt different. I understood now that I wasn't just looking up at the heavens. I was looking at a reminder of how vast, how infinite God's love truly is. The experience at the grocery store had stayed with me, not because of what I had done, but because of what it had confirmed. The angels don't always appear as winged messengers of light. Sometimes they work through us. I thought back to what the being of light had shown me, the way angels guide people, sometimes through the quietest of nudges, sometimes through the unexpected kindness of a stranger. That day at the store, I had felt that nudge, and I had listened. How many times had I ignored them before? How many moments had I dismissed as mere coincidence when they were really divine whispers, urging me to step into someone's life at just the right time? I sighed, leaning back in my chair, my breath visible in the crisp night air. If I had learned anything since returning, it was this: we are all part of something greater than we realize. Some people are given visions, moments where the veil is lifted, where the spiritual world becomes undeniable. Others walk by faith alone, never seeing the angels who surround them, but still just as loved, just as guided. And then there are those of us caught somewhere in between, not fully in heaven, not fully in the world, but aware enough to know that both exist. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to just be still. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because I finally understood. Life isn't about waiting for miracles to appear. It's about becoming the miracle someone else has been praying for. And in that simple truth, I found peace. The days grew shorter, and autumn began to slip into winter. The golden leaves that had once covered the streets were now brittle and sparse, carried away by the wind, making room for the cold stillness that would soon settle in. But something inside me had changed. Since my return, I had been moving through life with a new kind of awareness, not just of the physical world around me, but of the unseen one that existed alongside it. I no longer questioned whether angels were real or whether God was present in the details of my life. I knew. And once you know, you start to hear things you never paid attention to before. Not voices, not anything dramatic or overwhelming, just gentle whispers, quiet urgings that stirred in my heart at unexpected moments. Like the one that led me to the grocery store that day, nudging me to pay for a stranger's groceries. Like the one that stopped me in my tracks as I walked past a homeless man outside a coffee shop, urging me to turn around and offer him my coat. Like the one that woke me up at 3:17 a.m. one night, a name pressing on my spirit so insistently that I finally got out of bed and prayed, only to find out later that the woman I had prayed for had been in the middle of a crisis at that very moment. These weren't coincidences. These were invitations, opportunities to be part of the unseen work that had always been happening around me. One evening, I was sitting in a small cafe sipping a cup of chamomile tea when I noticed a young man sitting alone at the corner table. He looked like he was in his early 20s, but something about him felt much older. His shoulders were slumped forward, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. I could feel it again, that quiet nudge. I had come to recognize it by now, that feeling that I was supposed to do something, say something. I hesitated. Not because I doubted, but because I didn't want to intrude. But then I remembered what the being of light had shown me, the way angels work through people, how simple acts of kindness can be divine interventions in disguise. So I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. He looked up, startled, as if I had pulled him out of a fog. He blinked at me for a moment before shrugging. "Sure." I sat down, wrapping my hands around my warm mug. "You seem like you've got a lot on your mind." He let out a small, hollow laugh. "That obvious, huh?" I nodded, offering a small smile. For a long moment, he just stared into his coffee. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." I didn't need to ask what he meant. I had seen that look before, the same one I had seen on the man in his car during my vision, the one gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing holding him together. He thought he was alone. He thought no one saw him. But he was wrong. And in that moment, I knew exactly why I had been nudged to sit here. "I don't know what you're facing," I said gently, "but I do know this. You are not alone." He scoffed, shaking his head. "I sure feel like I am." I reached into my purse, pulled out a napkin, and grabbed the pen from my pocket. I wrote down one sentence. "You are more loved than you know." Then I slid the napkin across the table. He hesitated before picking it up, staring at the words like they were something foreign, something unfamiliar. And then, to my surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "My mom used to say that to me," he whispered, "before she died." A lump formed in my throat. I placed my hand over his and squeezed it gently. "She still does," I said. "You just forgot how to hear her." He let out a shaky breath, his fingers tightening around the napkin. And for the first time since I had sat down, I saw something shift in his eyes. Hope. It wasn't big, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there. And sometimes, that's enough. As I walked home that night, I felt something settle deep in my soul. The work of angels isn't always about grand miracles or dramatic encounters. Sometimes it's just about being present, listening to the quiet urgings, acting on the small, seemingly insignificant moments that nudge us toward another soul in need. And maybe that was why I had been sent back. Not to prove anything, not to argue or convince, but to simply remind people, one heart at a time, that they are seen, they are loved, and they are never, ever alone. And for that, I was endlessly grateful. Winter arrived in full force, blanketing the world in quiet. Snow fell in thick, swirling patterns outside my window, covering rooftops, sidewalks, and the branches of the old maple tree in my front yard. The world outside felt still, almost sacred, as if even the earth itself had paused to listen. In many ways, I had learned to do the same. Since returning from my near-death experience, I had become more attuned to the quiet moments, the whispers of the unseen world, the gentle nudges that guided my steps. They didn't come as dramatic revelations or thunderous voices from the heavens. They came in the form of small, simple invitations to pay attention. And I was listening. One evening, I sat in my favorite chair by the fireplace, a cup of tea warming my hands, when the memory of my time beyond the veil resurfaced with stunning clarity. It wasn't just a recollection. It was as if I were there again, feeling the light, the love, the overwhelming sense of belonging. But this time, I focused on something I hadn't before, the way everything had been communicated. In that realm, words weren't spoken the way they are here. There was no need for language as we know it, no need for explanations, no room for misunderstanding. Everything was felt, understood, received directly into the soul, like pure truth flowing effortlessly from one being to another. It was the language of heaven, a language made entirely of love. And suddenly, I understood something profound. We may not have the same ability to communicate this way on earth, but that doesn't mean we aren't meant to try. Every time we choose kindness over cruelty, patience over frustration, love over indifference, we are speaking the language of heaven. Every time we offer a comforting hand, a word of encouragement, or a moment of genuine compassion, we are echoing the same truth I was shown in the presence of the being of light. Love is the most powerful force in existence. It is not bound by time, space, or even death. And when we love, even in the smallest of ways, we participate in something eternal. A few days later, I had the opportunity to put this understanding into practice. I was at a small coffee shop, the scent of roasted beans filling the air as I waited in line. The woman ahead of me, a middle-aged woman in a thick wool coat, seemed flustered as she rummaged through her purse, her movements quick and anxious. The barista gave her a patient smile. "Take your time." "I know I have it somewhere," the woman mumbled, pulling out receipts, spare change, and an old pack of gum. Finally, she sighed in frustration. "I must have left my wallet at home." Without hesitation, I stepped forward. "I'll cover it," I said, offering the cashier my card. The woman turned, startled. "Oh no, you don't have to do that." "I know," I said, smiling. "But I want to." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she just looked at me. Then she exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't say anything more, because words weren't needed. She had received something beyond a free cup of coffee. She had received a reminder that she was seen, that she was not alone, that kindness still existed in the world. Later that evening, as I walked home through the freshly fallen snow, I thought about the way we often complicate things. We search for grand signs, for undeniable proof that God is near. We long for burning bushes, for parting seas, for angels to appear before us with messages written in fire. But maybe heaven speaks in quieter ways. Maybe it speaks in the kindness of a stranger, the warmth of a shared smile, the comfort of a hand reaching out when we least expect it. Maybe it speaks in a cup of coffee paid for at just the right moment, or in the gentle whisper to pray for someone's name when we wake in the middle of the night, or in the simple act of sitting beside someone who looks like they are carrying too much. I had been to the other side. I had seen the light, the angels, the vast tapestry of souls woven together in ways too beautiful for human minds to fully grasp. And yet, the most important lesson I had brought back was one we can all live by, right here, right now. Love, give, listen, be present. Because in those moments, we are not just living our lives, we are speaking the language of heaven. And that is the closest we will ever come to touching eternity while still standing on this earth. The first time I shared my full experience in front of a group, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was a small gathering at my church. Just a handful of people seated in the fellowship hall, sipping coffee, their faces expectant, yet cautious. Some had come because they were curious, others because they had lost someone and were searching for comfort. A few had likely come with skepticism, unsure if they believed in near-death experiences at all. I wasn't there to convince them. I was just there to tell the truth. I started at the beginning. The accident, the sudden silence, the light that was more than light. I described the being of pure love, the tapestry of souls, the unseen battle, and the way angels move among us, unseen but never absent. I told them how some people are given visions while others are asked to walk by faith alone, but that neither path is better, only different. And finally, I told them what I knew beyond any doubt. We are never alone. Not in our pain, not in our joy, not even in death. The room was silent when I finished. A few people wiped their eyes. One woman sat completely still, as if lost in thought, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then, an older man at the back of the room cleared his throat. "I lost my wife last year," he said. "I've been asking God for a sign ever since." I met his gaze. "Maybe the sign isn't something you see," I said softly. "Maybe it's something you feel. Maybe it's knowing that she's not gone, just beyond what your eyes can perceive." He nodded slowly, blinking away tears. The woman with her hands folded finally spoke. "I've always wanted to believe in angels," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've never seen one." I smiled. "You don't have to see them to know they're there." She exhaled, as if letting go of something she had been holding on to for years. And in that moment, I knew. This was why I had been sent back. Not to prove anything, not to argue with skeptics, but to plant seeds of hope. That night, as I sat on my back porch, looking up at the endless stretch of stars, I thought about how much had changed since the day of my accident. I was still me. I still drank my morning coffee. I still folded laundry. I still laughed at my grandson Ethan's silly jokes. I still had days where I felt tired, where I worried about things that probably didn't matter in the grand scheme of eternity. But I also carried something now that I hadn't before. An awareness. A quiet knowing that, whether I was paying attention or not, the unseen world was always moving, always working, always near. I had once believed that miracles were rare, that divine encounters were reserved for a chosen few. But now, I understood something far greater. Miracles happen all the time. We just fail to recognize them. Every time a burden is lifted, every time love is chosen over fear, every time we offer kindness without expecting anything in return, every time a prayer is answered, not always in the way we want, but in the way we need. Every time we feel a whisper of peace in the middle of chaos. These are the echoes of heaven, the places where eternity touches earth, the places where God gently reminds us, "I am here." 3 years had passed since the accident. Ethan was now 9, growing taller by the day. Rachel was thriving in her career, her heart softer now toward the things she once questioned. My life had fallen into a rhythm, different than before, but good. One afternoon, Ethan and I were sitting on a park bench, watching the ducks glide across the pond. He swung his little legs, lost in thought. Then suddenly he turned to me. "Grammy?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think angels ever get tired?" I smiled. "No, I don't think they do." He nodded, considering this. "That makes sense," he said, "because they have a lot of work to do." I chuckled. "That they do." He glanced at me, tilting his head. "Do you think they still talk to you?" I reached over, tucking a strand of his hair behind his ear. "I think they talk to all of us," I said. "We just have to learn how to listen." He grinned. "I want to learn." I squeezed his hand. "You already are." As we walked back toward the car, I felt it again. That gentle presence, that quiet assurance that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because I had all the answers, not because I had been given some special knowledge, but because I had learned the most important thing of all. God is closer than we think, and that truth, it is enough. It is always enough. Lessons learned from my near-death experience. Looking back on my journey, from the moment of my accident to the life I now live with a renewed sense of awareness, I realized that what I experienced was not just for me. It was meant to be shared. The lessons I brought back from the other side continue to shape how I see the world, how I interact with people, and how I trust in God's presence in my life. Here are the most profound lessons I learned. 1. We are never alone. One of the most comforting truths I brought back is that God is always near. Whether we feel Him or not, whether we sense the presence of angels or not, we are never abandoned. Heaven is closer than we think, and we are constantly being guided, protected, and loved, even in the moments when we feel lost or forgotten. 2. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. In the presence of divine light, I understood that love is not just an emotion, it is the very fabric of existence. Everything in the spiritual realm operates through love. When we love, we align ourselves with something eternal, something far greater than we can comprehend. Even the smallest act of kindness has a ripple effect beyond what we can see. 3. Prayers are always heard. I was shown that no prayer goes unheard. Even when we think we are praying into silence, our words move through the spiritual realm, creating ripples that touch lives in ways we may never fully understand. Sometimes the answers come in ways we don't expect. Sometimes what feels like divine silence is actually divine protection. But every prayer matters. 4. Miracles are everywhere, if we pay attention. Before my experience, I thought miracles were rare, extraordinary events. Now I understand that miracles happen every single day. The problem is not that they don't exist. It's that we fail to recognize them. The right person calling at the right time. A sudden feeling of peace in the midst of turmoil. A stranger offering kindness at the exact moment it's needed. These are not coincidences. They are divine interventions. 5. Angels are always at work. I was shown that angels are constantly moving through our lives, guiding, protecting, and encouraging us, even when we don't see them. Sometimes they work through a stranger, a friend, or a quiet nudge in our hearts. They never interfere with free will, but they do everything in their power to help us find our way. 6. Faith opens our eyes to the unseen. Some people are given visions or near-death experiences, but most are asked to walk by faith alone. That doesn't mean they are any less connected to the spiritual world. Faith is what allows us to perceive spiritual truths even when we cannot see them. The more we trust, the more we begin to recognize how God is working in our lives. 7. The smallest acts of kindness have eternal impact. I once believed that changing the world required big actions, but now I know that small, everyday kindnesses carry just as much weight in the spiritual realm. A simple word of encouragement, a helping hand, a prayer whispered for someone who may never know. It all matters. Love given freely is never wasted. 8. Forgiveness frees us. I saw how unforgiveness creates spiritual barriers, not just between us and others, but between us and God. Holding on to bitterness or resentment blocks our ability to experience peace. When we forgive, we release ourselves just as much as we release the other person. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what was done. It means refusing to let it poison our hearts. 9. We are all connected. One of the most beautiful things I saw was how every soul is connected, like threads in a great tapestry. Our actions, our prayers, our choices, they all affect more than just ourselves. We are woven together in ways we cannot yet see, and every act of love strengthens the whole. 10. Death is not the end. I no longer fear death because I now know it is not an ending. It is simply a transition. Life continues beyond this world, more vibrant and real than anything we can imagine. The love we have shared, the good we have done, the prayers we have offered, they all carry forward into eternity.